Okay, it's also recording too now as well.
Okay, great.
All right, and I'll go back and mute myself.
Thank you.
So I will begin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney Pierce. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Anti-Trafficking Outreach and Direct Service Coordinator at Samaritan House. I've been there for 4 years, and my position there includes doing the majority of outreach and education for our anti-trafficking department and helping to do direct service coordination for our department as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Danny Miller Holmes. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My position is Outreach Education Specialist. I have also previously worked here at Samaritan House as a Housing Stabilization Case Manager. And my job right now as Outreach Education Specialist is I provide educational opportunities about what domestic violence looks like in our area, what Samaritan House is doing to intervene and prevent domestic violence, and how the community can help. But then I also do outreach as well to our identified underserved populations, and I'll mention that later on in our presentation.
Good evening, I am Rebecca Headings. I am the primary prevention specialist at Samaritan House. I've been with Samaritan House for 18 years. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and my position, I am encouraged to go and talk to community members about assisting individuals, especially young adults and children, in trying to be violence-free and breaking the cycle of domestic violence. But I also speak with adults on the effects of domestic violence on their children.
So tonight's presentation consists of violence across the lifespan, and we will be discussing what that looks like in our respective areas of expertise, mine in human trafficking, Danny's in domestic violence, and Rebecca's in prevention and working with youth. So we are going to talk about what does it look like? What is the intersections of human trafficking and domestic violence? And today is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and you'll see lots of folks with blue pins on or wearing the color blue to recognize and represent victims/survivors of human trafficking. We want people to understand that the work that we do at Samaritan House is not siloed, but it's very much intersectional. And so Danny, myself, Rebecca, and the rest of the staff work very closely together, working with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, homeless, and human trafficking. So for the terminology, we'll be talking about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, family violence, prevention, human trafficking, and victims/survivors.
Thank you, Courtney. I had a problem unmuting myself. And so we just like to introduce terminology so that people just kind of become more and more familiar with the language that we use in the anti-violence movement. And mention with the victim survivor language, many times those who come and use our programs, they themselves decide what they want to, kind of call themselves victim survivor. I even have friends who are further down the line in their healing and they call themselves a thriver, or I've heard this term thriver as well. So just for the purposes of this presentation, we'll be using this language. And so we'll go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. And before we jump into the presentation, I definitely want to let folks know that what we'll be talking about is a heavy subject and it can be uncomfortable, which is completely normal. And if at any point in time you need to step away from the presentation or you're triggered by anything that occurs, take your time to take care of yourself. At Samaritan House, we're really big proponents of self-care. And so we want to make sure that we share that with the audience that we're working with as well. And if anyone needs additional resources or additional time to process anything that might come up, please contact myself, Rebecca, or Danny, and our contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And we want to, again, thank you so much for joining. I know it's a very heavy subject topic that we'll be talking about tonight, but it's really important to shed light on what's happening here in our area.
Yeah, thank you for that, Courtney. And also just a reminder, since we are on Zoom and everybody can be just anywhere listening to this. So if that's the case, if you need to put headphones in, if you have kids around, go ahead and take the time to do that. So we'll talk about, what our services are, about our organization, talk about domestic violence, as Courtney mentioned, talk about domestic violence in adults, domestic violence and its effects on children. And then we'll also Courtney will talk about trafficking, and then we'll show those connections of what that means across a lifespan. So Samaritan House, we have been around for 35 years in the Hampton Roads region. We recognize that domestic violence can impact anyone regardless of their age, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, immigration status, or education level. And we also recognize that domestic violence and trafficking are incredibly complex issues. And so our services must reflect that complexity. And we also want to honor those who are experiencing, violence in providing a safe and confidential place to access services if they need them. And so we provide services and housing programs for those who become homeless because they experience violence. And so whether that is domestic violence, human trafficking, or sexual assault. And so we'll talk through a little bit about what those services look like. So of course, we have a 24/7 hotline. The advocates on the hotline will answer any calls and provide resources or get people connected to the services that they may need. We also have what I think a lot of people are probably the most familiar with our program is our emergency housing. We have 14 emergency houses across the area that are all in confidential locations because we want people to know that they have a safe place to go to if they are experiencing a violent situation. And I will also make the note that from March and May from this last year, when there were more restrictions due to COVID, we actually had a 166% increase in using hotels and an 86% increase in our hotline. And so sometimes people will make the connection that, oh, the pandemic caused more violence to happen. And that's not necessarily the case. That violence, domestic violence and trafficking were already happening, but the pandemic has just enhanced the violence because of the economic pressures and other pressures that have come with the pandemic. So my coworkers have been amazing in responding to these services or to the people who are possibly using services.
Yeah.
And so we actually, over this last fiscal year, assisted over 300.
What's this?
And I do want to remind you, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. So if you could remember to mute your microphone, that would be lovely. Thank you. And then we also have our Housing Now programs. So what happens is when somebody comes into emergency housing, they might relocate to another safe place, or they could go into our housing program where we help with security deposits and rental assistance. And when they are working with their case managers in the housing program, they have rental assistance, but they also work on gaining stability. So case managers can connect our program participants with mainstream benefits, with income resources and job readiness support. So I mentioned our case managers in housing, but we also have our case management in emergency housing as well. And so again, they connect our program participants with transportation assistance, counseling, advocacy, and any community resources that they may need. And then we also have our Children's Center of Excellence, which provides supportive services to 75 to 100 children that would be exposed to violence per year. And so a lot of times people don't always consider this, but quite a few of those who come and use our programs are children who come with their parent. And so that's why we have this conversation to show how violence can affect people's lives across the lifespan. And then we also have our victim advocates as well. This is a point where I always like to say that you do not have to be in our housing programs to utilize our services. So a victim advocate is a perfect example of that. You do not have to be in emergency housing to work with a victim advocate. So some of the things that our victim advocates do is help with safety planning. They provide legal education. They're not advice because they're not lawyers or attorneys, but they can help people figure out, what kind of protective order do they need to get. They also assist with court accompaniment. We know that it can be a very complicated and intimidating process to go to court to face the person who has caused the victim or survivor harm. And so they will provide that emotional support and help navigate those processes. And then we also offer a support group where our program participants can come together and support one another and share their stories. And I just want to let you know, if you have any further questions about what Samaritan House offers, you are more than welcome to follow up with us and contact us to let us know what you would like to find out. So part of my presentation and my background is working in the realm of domestic violence. And so since we started a little later, I'm going to apologize, but I'm going to probably talk pretty quickly just to make sure that we have time to kind of cover all of our subjects. So what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behaviors that one person uses in a relationship to maintain power and control over another person. So the thing that makes domestic violence what it is, the two things to remember is that it's all about a pattern of behaviors and the motivation is power and control. And so we'll talk about what those patterns might look like and what tactics are used to gain power and control. So this is a wheel that was created in the anti-violence movement. And this is used as a tool to talk about and to show what potential tactics abusers may use to control a person that they're in relationship with. And so you can see on this outer rim here, it says physical and sexual violence, but other types of abuse can include psychological, economic, and digital abuse as well. And these tactics, these sections in this inner wheel are tactics that are used to reinforce the more violent incidents to show like, hey, remember that when I did that more violent thing, here are these other things that I'm going to use to reinforce that when there potentially might be another more violent incident happening in the future. So we're going to very quickly touch on what each of these look like. So the first is using economic abuse. An example that I like to say for this is we have seen abusers try to ruin the victim survivor's credit. We know that it's pretty hard to navigate in this world with a credit score that could be lower, and so we do try to work on that if that is the case. So that's an example. Another is using coercion and threats, telling the person that they have to drop the charges or making them do illegal things. So if they try to seek help, they'll say, but you did this, whatever this illegal thing is. And we want people to know that we are not going to hear and judge them for that. If they did, we are here to help them. Using intimidation, we are seeing in a lot of new research coming out, the abuse of pets is used fairly often to intimidate a victim survivor. And so one of our shelters actually is made to receive pets that come with a victim survivor. And so that could be a barrier to leaving, is they don't want to leave their pet in a dangerous situation. So they can actually bring their pet with them to one of our housing locations. Using emotional abuse, we really do see the long-term effects of the psychological and emotional abuse that can be experienced in domestic violence relationships. And so this could be calling names, putting the person down, making them feel bad about themselves. Using isolation, usually the abuser does try to cut off and destroy the bridges with the program participants' support system. So they feel like they may not have anybody to reach out to. But we always want to say that there is always an option for help. There is always someone you can reach out to. We do see this a lot, minimizing, denying, and blaming. Say there is a violent incident. Usually the pattern of behavior for the abuser is to make light of it, to say it's not that big of a deal, or even say that the victim survivor caused it, which they cannot cause that. The person chose to abuse. We also do see this often as well, which is why we do have supportive services for children, is that children are often used in abusive relationships. So we do see threats to take the children away, or even using the children to relay messages between the parents. And then the last one here is using privilege. So being the one person in the relationship to define each partner's roles and duties, that it's not decided together. And so that's a tactic that we do see a lot as well. So just a reminder, these are tactics that are used in a domestic violence relationship that reinforce more violent incidents of physical, sexual abuse. And so just want to show that I definitely have not covered the complexity of what domestic violence is, just kind of provided some examples. And then of course, I always try to show the opposite of the power and control wheel. This is our equality wheel. And so every relationship we all have in our lives, should be based on equality and respect. Like this is everything that we all have to work on, right? And so we do try to talk with our program participants and say, like, these are all things that you are worthy of as a person. You deserve dignity and respect. And so we also try to work in showing our program participants these things as well. So we just want to take the time just to, if you have any questions, if you want to type them in the chat, just let us know if you have any comments right now, or if you just want to kind of wait, kind of gather yourself in this moment, ask a question later, you're more than welcome to do that. And I think Rebecca, there she goes. All right.
Sorry, technology. I'm going to talk to you all for a little bit on the effects of domestic violence on children and youth. I am the primary prevention specialist, and so when I initially thought about prevention, I thought that I would start working with preschool aged children. But when I started doing my research, I discovered that by 7 weeks after conception, the first neurons are beginning to develop. And by birth, the brain has about all of the new neurons it will ever have. Therefore, a child in utero who is experiencing domestic violence through the parent will actually start having effects. Maybe attention deficit disorder or anxiety. Of course, we can also have to consider health problems due to injuries that the parent may sustain. Next. So as the children get older, obviously the effects of domestic violence will be seen in different ways. Emotionally, we have children who are acting out in the classroom, at home, in the community. Same with their behavior that they are displaying. Maybe they are more defensive. Maybe they're more of a caretaker role. Physically, we have children that have a lot of psychosomatic complaints, a lot of headaches, a lot of stomach aches. They're constantly tired. They may be feeling responsible for what's going on in the home. If I just would have listened, if I would have been there, then I could have stopped the assault from happening. And unfortunately, it can lead to the development of poor social skills. They could enter into unhealthy relationships themselves, or they could become excessively social or even promiscuous. So when we're working with children, we want to teach them very quickly how to keep safe when there is a dangerous situation in their home. Because we are not trained therapists, I don't talk to the children to have them share what's going on in their home, what have they experienced, and we don't want to scare them, because though they understand that there's fighting or that there's uncertainty in their home, they may not understand the term of domestic violence. So we teach them to stay safe. That way we can say, if there is a fire, if there is someone you don't know and you feel afraid, what would you do? Teaching them to stay away. So for young children, they are probably less likely to want to go and get involved in the situation. But we also want to talk to them about avoiding getting trapped. You may want to go hide under your bed, or you may want to go hide in the kitchen or the bathroom. And we let them know that those are not healthy options. So we talk about grabbing a cell phone in the house, because most people have a cell phone. And even if the cell phone does not have service and it is charged, the child would be able to call 911 and let them know what is happening in the home. Or if they are unable to talk, the police will track an unanswered 911 call and hopefully be able to respond and assist the victim and the children. And at the same time, letting them know they need to go to a safe place. So letting the parents know that, just like when you're talked about to do a fire drill in your home, what would you do if there was a fire? How would we escape? Where would we go? Implementing those same tactics with your child to let them know that it is their job to get to a safe place, and that they don't need to stick around and try to get involved and potentially get more hurt. Next. Thank you. So another thing that we need to take into account is helping parents, because parents are going to be the first line in helping their children who are recovering from a traumatic experience. Of course, the parent is suffering also. They have been victimized. They have been left with a sense of helplessness and frustration. We may frequently talk about the victim as being the mother, but we do know that men can also be victims of violence. And so we could be working with a father who is leaving an abusive situation and becoming a single parent. So the term of SAS was developed by Susan Blumenfeld, who is the Child Trauma Director at the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. The first thing that she wanted to let us know was the first S for safety, both physical and emotional. So reminding the child, we have left, we are in an emergency housing program now, or we have moved in with these friends and family. Maybe even explaining that they're not going to see the offending person again for a while, that they have done something that was not okay. And they are going to take a break and think about what happened, because we don't want children to think that there is more for them to worry about. Being sure to instill a new routine is going to help the child feel more physically and emotionally safe. So at Samaritan House, we like to try to help the family and the children remain in their school of origin if it is safe to do so, so that at least something is familiar to them. The A is for attachment. So the non-abusive parent is more available, but at the same time, they may also be trying to heal themselves. And so talking to the parent about how they can form a healthier relationship with their children, and letting them know that they are there to work as a new team, and to go on and make healthier decisions together. The other S is for self-regulation. So how do you help your child manage the feelings that they have, their fear, their anxiety, their anger, and let them know that all of those feelings are okay, but teaching mindful exercises such as deep breathing, giving distractions, and in other ways, just learning how to self-soothe again. By the age of 5, most children should have learned how to do that. However, if they're living in a traumatic environment, those things may have regressed. And then the final S is for self-esteem. And so both the non-abusing parent and the children probably have always experienced quite a blow to their self-esteem. They're feeling worthless. They're feeling like it's their fault. They're feeling confused. And so it is important to use the language that reduces the blame, that the non-abusing caregiver just say, this was not my fault and this was not your fault. The perpetrator or the abusive person made poor decisions, and that is why we have chosen to leave the situation. Unfortunately, the most important reason that we need to do prevention is because the cycle will continue. Dating abuse has been found to begin as early as the 6th grade. So when I go and talk to older elementary school students, they may not be thinking about dating, but it is right around the corner. And so talking to them about the importance of healthy relationships using a youth version of the Power and Control and Equality Wheels is very important. 1 in 10 teen girls and 1 in 11 teen boys admits to having experienced physical violence in a dating relationship within the past year. So if I'm working with a group of students and I tell them to count themselves off by 10 or 11 and have those students stand up, it gives them a visual. Next. So again, I went quickly, but I just wanted to give you all a little bit of information on the types of behavior that you may see in a child who has experienced violence, especially as a witness. So if anyone has any questions or comments, again, we encourage you to put a message in the chat, or you can use the reaction to raise your hand.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I have just also put in the chat a link to our survey. I'm trying to do that a little bit earlier in our presentation, and so folks will have opportunity to have it open when our presentation ends. We would love to have your feedback because we are doing lots of community outreach and engagement, and we want to know exactly what our community is looking for. Would you have corrections, concerns, or questions? We want to be able to be there to make sure that we're giving you the information that's needed for our area. So as stated before, today is National Wear Blue today, and that is because we are honoring victims and survivors of human trafficking here in the United States and internationally. So when we look at human trafficking, we oftentimes define it by breaking it apart to sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Those are federal definitions that we use. We're a federally funded organization, but I oftentimes like to somehow simplify it by saying really it's all labor trafficking because sex is work, or sex acts are work. And so really it can all be defined as labor trafficking, but we're defining sex trafficking and labor trafficking. We are defining it as the recruitment, the harboring, the transportation, the provision, the patronization, obtaining, or soliciting for the purpose of commercial sex acts, or through force, fraud, and coercion to involve debt bondage or involuntary servitude. And so as Danny spoke about domestic violence, the 2 words that she spoke about was the pattern of power and control. In human trafficking, the 3 words that we are often saying all the time is force, fraud, and coercion, because that's how you define trafficking. And so when you're looking at the model beside you, it is the AMP model. And that model is basically another visual in how we talk about human trafficking. So it's the actions, which is the inducing, recruiting, harboring, providing, or obtaining. The means, it's through force, fraud, and coercion, and it's for the purpose of commercial sex or labor services. And I do want to say that here in the United States, we have deemed 18 as the age of adulthood and accountability. If you are under the age of 18, you do not have ownership or autonomy over your own body, so you cannot provide commercial sex acts or provide acts of labor. And so if you're under the age of 18 and you're being forced, frauded, and coerced, it's automatically human trafficking. And as we move into looking at trafficking, we do break it down. So we're going to talk about sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So sex trafficking, we look at sexual acts. And so within these acts, it's not limited to, but it could include any form of sexual acts that you're forced, frauded, or coerced into doing, which could include pornography. Now, pornography is not illegal, but what we're saying is if someone is being forced into pornography, that's where our concern is coming in. The same way with exotic dancing or strip clubs, which are not illegal, but we want to make sure that folks there that are dancing, or if you're providing a service in the industry of pornography, is that you are actually doing that free, and that you're doing that without force, fraud, and coercion. We've seen military sex parties here in our area, which means that there are folks that are in the military or any other branch of the government that would establish like a party, and then there would be someone that come and dance for them, or someone that would provide them sexual acts. And again, because our population is made up of lots of military folks, both folks that are out to serve, and then folks that are out to exploit people, where that's something that we're seeing here locally. And we also see the intersectionality of sex and labor trafficking when we look at massage parlors, because they're actually doing massages, but then performing a sex act at the end. And so we see where those cross sections are. And the reason that we have trafficking is of anything else. It's a market-driven ideology. That there is a demand for something. There is a demand to purchase sex or forced labor. And then there are folks that want that forced sex or labor. And then networking, I always like to bring this up. The majority of the program participants that we've worked with that are victims/survivors of human trafficking at Samaritan House, they were trafficked by an intimate partner. And there again, you see the intersectionality of both domestic violence and human trafficking. It is not folks that they don't know. It is often a family member, a spouse, a friend, someone that they met on the internet, which is what we're seeing a lot when we're looking at survivors that are youths. Parents, be aware of what your children are doing online and do your best to monitor, but in monitoring, do your best to make sure that your children and your youth know that they are empowered to be able to come to you with information, and empowered to be able to shut down conversations online themselves. And so that is what we're seeing. We're seeing networks of folks that are being trafficked by intimate partners. And when we look at labor trafficking or a forced labor situation, the victims are forced against their will to work under the threat of violence and some other forms of punishment. Their freedom is restricted, not completely taken, but oftentimes much restricted. To the degree of ownership is exerted. And so when we look at victims of labor trafficking, they're not homogenous, right? So they look like all of us. They're folks from different backgrounds, folks that are foreign national, folks that are from the United States, folks that speak English, folks that do not. And so the common types of labor trafficking and what we're seeing in our area is oftentimes domestic work. We're also seeing farm work happening. When we look at the more rural areas in our in the Hampton Roads area, we're looking at areas in the Eastern Shore where there are potato farms and strawberry farms. And so oftentimes when I'm grocery shopping, it takes me a moment to just pause and think about who was able to gather these fruits and vegetables that I'm purchasing. And I hope that the gathering of this was done in safe, healthy conditions with dignity and respect. And so the scope of trafficking in our area. So this is the why do we have it? So we're in the smack dab of two of the largest trafficking areas, which is New York City and Atlanta. And so we're right in the middle. And so we can be in Washington, D.C. in 3 hours, and we can be in North Carolina in an hour. So our interstate and highways, they really help to accompany and facilitate the throughway of trafficking here in our area. We have large air and seaports. We have a large military presence. And again, we're really grateful for all the men and women that serve in our military. But with that comes the amalgamation of lots of different people. So there are folks that are in the military, it makes up all kinds, right? And so because we have such a large presence of military and they're often transient, it can be one of the factors that includes that the Hampton Roads area being at higher risk of human trafficking. We have a transient community, as I said before. We have lots of incredible universities and places for tourism out on the ocean front, which is where the majority of our program survivors are often trafficked, which is in hotels and motels. And then we have a large homeless and at-risk youth population. We have a great partnership with the LGBT Life Center, and they do great work at doing outreach to all youths. And they do great work at doing outreach to our marginalized youth communities, which would include brown and Black youth, and then those that are LGBT+, particularly trans, brown, and Black youth. So a lot happening within that presentation. Again, this is just a moment for you to sort of gather your thoughts and check in. And I just want to remind everyone that as you enter the program, make sure that you mute yourself, and that muting button is actually right at the right-hand corner. And you'll see 3 little dots, and then beside that, it'll say mute or unmute, and you can mute yourself via that. Make sure that you have the ability to engage in the chat. And if there is anything that you want to save to the end, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So what does it look like, and why do we have this presentation? Because we talk about violence across the lifespan. And as Rebecca spoke about earlier, with violence starting as little as 7 weeks within the uterus, we're looking at what that looks like throughout the lifespan. So that includes our infancy, and that includes all the way up to older adulthood. And so as you can view the lifespan, remember that violence is interconnected and it builds upon itself. And at Samaritan House, that is what we hear in the hallways. And when we're talking about and learning about complex and compounded trauma, that trauma can intersect itself at any point in your life, whether you are an infant, a child, a teenager, a young adult, or older adult. And I wanted to read this quote. I think it's very powerful. It talks about domestic violence and human trafficking are dire issues of great importance that deserve their own individual recognition. However, by acknowledging the intersections of domestic violence and human trafficking, we can begin to really realize and recognize how complex patterns and abusive behaviors creates an environment that enables the violence to perpetrate. And so our jobs as advocates and anti-violent advocates is to want to work ourselves out of a job. We want to see a world freed from violence. But if we don't understand how these problems intersect, that's not something that will happen, because we will continue to perpetuate these cycles of violence. So when we're looking at how to support a survivor, we would say, first and foremost, acknowledge, right? And this is something that hopefully this is not the first time you're hearing this, but acknowledge that this is a difficult, scary situation. As a victim advocate formerly at Samaritan House, I would sit down with program participants and I would say, you're the expert in your story. You tell me how best I can serve you, because I want to acknowledge what you've gone through, and I want to understand that this is a scary situation, but I want to empower you to know that you can make decisions that can have positive outcomes for you, and I'm here to serve you in whatever capacity that would be best for you. Safety. Don't be afraid to let them know that you are concerned about their safety. And I think that as humankind, that's really important, to be able to check in with one another and say, I'm concerned about your safety. Now, whatever decision that you make after that is up to that person, and we want to advocate on their behavior. But for us, as those that are trying to intervene, we want to make sure that folks know that their safety is utmost importance to us. Non-judgmental. If I could put a star by this one, this would be it. When we're offering support to survivors, whether they're going to stay or leave, or even make decisions that we wouldn't make or that we don't feel comfortable with, we have to make sure that they understand that this is not a place of judgment, and this is not a place to give up on them. In former presentations, you'll see, if we're talking about specifically about domestic violence, it takes an average of 7 times for someone to leave their relationship. And so we want to be people, and we want to be a community that says every time you choose to leave or you come back, that we'll be there to support you in a non-judgmental way. It really does make a difference. And be conscious of how the community responds, right? We can all say that these are trying times, right? We are, I'm sure, worn and weary, but it really does show the strength of the community in the way that we respond to violence. And I think it's really important that we respond to violence that's happening with our community with care and concern for the person who's being harmed, and accountability for the person who is harming.
So I will take over here. So one of the things that we do always try to point out in every single presentation, any engagement in the community, is that domestic violence and trafficking is never the victim or survivor's fault. A lot of the times in conversations we'll hear, well, why don't they just leave? And so Courtney just mentioned that statistic that hasn't changed in over 25 years that it does take generally 7 times before somebody will permanently leave their abuser. And that's because we recognize there are so many barriers to leaving. And so if you're interested in wanting to kind of learn more about that and have a more in-depth conversation, I do provide a more in-depth presentation about domestic violence. But we want to encourage people to say, instead of asking that kind of, unfortunately, kind of victim blaming question, well, why don't they just leave? Maybe try, well, why do abusers choose to abuse? Put that accountability and that choice back on them, because they are making that choice to inflict violence on someone else. And, we do try to provide some tools of, how to be a Samaritan, how to intervene. And again, we do have a more in-depth training on kind of different parts of this presentation. And so we do have trainings to kind of give more ways to provide support. But of course is knowing the local hotline numbers. I'll show in the next slide all of the hotline numbers for our region. And so I'll show that in a minute, but this is our hotline number. Share with any group, that you're involved with. We talk to churches, we talk to businesses, we talk to other nonprofits. We think that it is important for our whole community to have a common understanding of what violence, how are people experiencing violence in our community, and how can we stop it? How can we shift ideologies away that are currently happening, because these situations are happening, so how can we stop it? And then emphasize that we do have trained advocates here to provide support that will recognize that the survivor is an expert on their situation, and we will honor that, and that they will provide education and resources for whatever that person needs. So if you have the capability to do so, please take a screenshot of this. These are our sister organizations in the region that provide services similar to ours. And so here are all of their hotline numbers, and you can see us up top, based out of Virginia Beach. And I do want to show you quickly some of our state and local resources. Our state coalition is the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. They provide wonderful resources and programs to stop violence from happening and to prevent it from happening. Here is our website as well, if you would like to go to our website and check out information there and what other things we have going on. The Polaris Project is a great website to go to get accurate information about trafficking. There is a lot of inaccurate information out there about trafficking, and so they really try to combat that. So that's a wonderful website to go to. And then the YWCA is our Regional Sexual Assault Response Team. And so they are the first contact for those who may have experienced a sexual assault. And then here are some national resources. I always try to provide as much information as I can. So the National Network to End Domestic Violence is a wonderful place to get more research on domestic violence. loveisrespect.org is a good place for teens to and parents to go to get information about dating violence. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center is a national organization to go to get more information about sexual violence. And then there is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, is another great resource to get more information about trafficking. And then how can you help? Again, we know that awareness is the first step in change, in creating social change. So awareness plus action. So first, we have to all become aware of what's actually happening in our communities and talk with one another. So if you are interested in that, please let us know. Oh, actually, I did skip ahead. Awareness also of our hotline. That's what I meant by that. But then also our education opportunities. And then we also have opportunities for volunteering and donating. And so if you're interested in that, you can contact our office. If you're interested in donating, you can text Sam to 50155. And then you can also see other ways to engage with our development opportunities on our website as well. And then again, if you would like to know more about all of these topics that we've talked about, Courtney, Rebecca, and I each provide more in-depth trainings and presentations on our subject. So Courtney, that's her email there. She provides really wonderful presentations about trafficking. Rebecca, her email is there as well, and she provides not only presentations, but also curriculum as well to work with children and youth to prevent violence from happening in the future. So you can contact her if you're interested in that. And then you can contact me if you would like to have a more in-depth conversation about domestic violence. All right, so we will stop here and pause for questions. I did notice in the chat earlier that someone had a question if this presentation can be shared. It is a pretty big file, so it's hard to share it, but if there is information, what I do is I do have it broken down into parts that I can send. So whoever who asks that, if you could please go ahead and send me your email, maybe in the chat, and I can find out from you what information that you would like to have. That would be great, and I can take your email, or I'll also share my email in the chat, and that could follow, and you can follow up with me. But as for now, does anybody else have any questions? And you're more than welcome to unmute yourself or put a question in the chat. We really want to hear from y'all who just, heard us talk. So we really want to see where you're at. Any questions? All right, I sent my email in the chat. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing. So yeah, just please let us know if you have any, as Courtney likes to say, comments, questions, or even corrections. We don't mind if anybody has a correction or something else that they would even like to add. Please let us know. Courtney, Rebecca, is there anything else that y'all would like to say?
I just want to thank everyone for attending. I hope that you gained some valuable information that you can share with those that you know to continue the conversation on understanding more about domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So please reach out to us if we can answer any additional questions for you, or if you are interested in us coming and providing a presentation specific to your organization.
And I just got the message in the chat. Thank you for the information.
I just wanted to remind everyone as well to take the survey if you have time. It's about 6 questions, about a minute survey, and we would love to have your feedback about ways that we can improve or different things that you learned about the presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you for the comment for Charlotte. Thank you for putting that in there. Appreciate it. And please let us know what your supervisor says if they would like a further presentation. We would love to facilitate it. So let us know. And if anybody doesn't have anything else to say, oh, please. Well, I guess we'll end it from here. Is that good? Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Dana. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.